a little boy came up to his mother and handed her a piece of paper on which were written these words. And it says, cleaning up my room this week, $1. Going to the store for you, $1.50. Babysitting my kid brother, $2.50. Taking out the trash, $1. Getting a good report card, $5. So the total owed to me is $11 in all. The mother picked up the paper, a pen, flipped the paper over to the other side, and wrote these words. For the 9 months I've carried you before birth, no charge. For all the nights that I sat up with you, no charge. For all the hard times and tears through the years, no charge. For bearing all the worries over you, no charge. For the toys, food, clothes, and wiping your nose and your bum as well, no charge. So son, when you add it up, the cost of my love for you is no charge. The little boy, after he had read that, there were tears in his eyes, and he looked straight at his mother and said, Mom, I do love you. Mom, I do love you. Then he took the pen and the paper and he wrote on it, on his side of it, paid in full. Now, I think the story illustrates a truth that the overwhelming majority of us feel about our mothers, that we do really love them so very much that we will never be able to repay the debt that we owe to them all of our lives. And in this regard, I actually had wanted to ask all the mothers in our midst to stand so that we can put our hands together to appreciate them and to honor them. But, well, since we have to move this service online at short notice, if you are watching this at home online with your mothers, guys, please give your mothers a hug and say, Mom, I sure do love you. Mom, I sure do love you. Why don't you just do that right now, wherever you are? Now, much as we love and appreciate our mothers for all that they've done for us, much as we extol their virtues, the truth is that this is not what I am going to talk about today. Because however much we may extol the virtues of mothers, many of them actually do struggle with a burden of inadequacy, of insecurity, of anxiety, and guilt even over their children. And I think this is to be expected because mothers, all mothers, want the very best for their children. And therefore, they often cannot help feeling that even their most valiant and already heroic efforts are still just not good enough. And you know, when anything goes wrong with the children, mothers almost inevitably will blame themselves. They'll take the blame upon themselves for it. And for those of you who are working mothers, I think the burden on you is an especially heavy one. And the truth is this, we all live in a world that's been broken and corrupted by sin. And sin affects everyone and every area of our life. And mothers are not exempt. Mothers are just as vulnerable to temptations and to errors. Mothers make mistakes just like all the rest of us. And that's why today we are going to learn from a story in the Bible, because the Bible is such a realistic book. It portrays a life and human nature just as they really are. And today we're going to learn from one mother's experience, one mother's mistakes in the Bible, so that we wouldn't have to make the same kind of mistakes. And we're going to go to Genesis chapter 27. We're going to start from verse 1. And let's read Genesis chapter 27, which says, when Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for his elder son Esau and said to him, my son, here I am. He answered. Isaac said, I am now an old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me to eat so that I may give you my blessing before I die. Now, Rebekah, Isaac's wife, and the mother of the two children, was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, bring me some game, prepare some tasty food to eat so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring 2 choice young goats so that I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father and eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies. Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, but my brother Esau is a hairy man, while I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing. His mother said to him, my son, don't worry, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go, get them for me. So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and she prepared some tasty food just the way his father liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of her elder son Esau, which she had in the house, and put them on the younger son Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with the goat skins. Then she handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread she had made. Really fascinating story. And today I want to share with you 3 lessons about being a mother, or what not to do as a mother, from this story, represented by 3 keywords, which are authority, agreement, and attachment. Authority, agreement, and attachment. Now let's start with the first one. Authority. Now all parents, all of us who are parents, we have to grapple with the tension between love and limits, between being tough and being tender. And I think all of us growing up can remember that our fathers were the authority figure at home, the tough guy who lays down the law. And we look to our mothers instead for the TLC, the tender, loving care. I mean, when you were a small kid and you had a fall, it is a lot more likely that your mother was the one who dried your tears and bandaged your wounds. And when you became a teenager, remember that? And you wanted to ask for an exception to your curfew, an extension to curfew, an exception to the rules, some rules that your parents have set. Whom are you more likely to approach? Daddy or mommy? Mommy, of course, because all of us know that it is far easier to beg, to badger, and even to bully mommy into agreeing to what we want. And many of us even have had this experience. We made the mistake of asking daddy first. And daddy says, no way. And what did we do? We secretly went to mommy and got her to say yes. And then we did whatever we wanted to do anyway, because mommy and daddy just simply couldn't get their act together, right? Now this differentiation between fathers and mothers is actually something that God has hardwired into parents. And it's a good thing. Fathers provide leadership, sets the limits, and the mothers provide a good balance to all that with their tenderness and with their gentleness. But as I said, we live in a fallen world. In a fallen world, parents often don't live up to God's original ideal. And for fathers, our problem most of the time is that we fail to provide adequate leadership. Mothers, on the other hand, because of their nature, often struggle with establishing authority over their children, the ability to get the children to do what they want. Now, Rebekah, like all mothers, wanted the best for her son, Jacob. She wanted it so badly that she even taught him to resort to deception, to secure his father's blessing by cheating, lying, stealing. She hatched a plot for Jacob to convince Isaac that he was his older brother Esau. And their conversation, the conversation between mother and child, is really very telling. We go back to it. We can find it in verse 12 when it says, when Jacob says, "What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing." And his mother responded, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me." Now, Jacob was hesitant about the scheme. Yeah, he didn't jump in immediately, right? He was hesitant, he was a bit reluctant, but look very carefully at why he was hesitating. Not because it was wrong to lie, to your own father especially. Not because it was immoral to cheat and steal. What was Jacob doing? Jacob was probing the loopholes in his mother's plan, right? Jacob wasn't struggling with the morality of the act. He was assessing its practicality. He was not concerned at all about whether it was right or wrong. He was only concerned if it would work or it would backfire. That's all. Jacob is one flawed character. How did he become such a flawed character? Rebekah's answer to him here reveals one major reason why he became the man that he was at this point in time. When she said, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Don't worry, just go and do it." You know, that is at the same time something so beautiful and yet so horrifying, right? Because that's a tragic distortion of something that's really beautiful. Rebekah, she would do anything for her son. She'll bear any burden for her son. She'll even gladly lay down her life for her son. She'll take any curse on her son's behalf. That's what's so wonderful about mothers, right? That they are so sacrificial that they do anything for their kids. But even something so beautiful as that can and has been corrupted by sin. And more importantly, it reveals how she had brought up Jacob all along. Because she always only wanted nothing less than the best for him. She wanted it at any cost. She'll do anything, pay any price, make any compromises, even if it means cheating and lying and stealing and breaking all of God's laws. She was a mother who excelled in love but failed miserably on establishing limits. Now, the Bible lays an injunction on both father and mother to teach and enforce God's authority in the life of the children. In the Bible, in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 6, it says, "These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Therefore, both fathers and mothers are commanded by God to exercise godly authority over their children." But I think it is fair to say, this is true in most of our experience and true in my observation, that more mothers struggle with establishing authority over their children than fathers do. It is not uncommon in church for fathers to come up to me and say something like this. This has happened quite a number of times. And the fathers will say something like this. They will say, "I really don't understand why my wife cannot get the children to do what she wants. You know, all I have to do is take one look at them, and then they'll fall into line. I don't even have to say anything. I really don't understand why my wife just cannot get the children to do what she wants." No, a lot of fathers have said that to me. And a lot of mothers, I've heard a lot of mothers asking questions about why they just cannot get the children to do certain things, or whatever those things may be. Why can't I get my child to eat vegetables? Why can't I get my child to sit in his chair? Sit still in his chair. Why can't I get my child into the car seat? Why can't I get my daughter to just lie still and go to sleep by herself? You can go on. The list is endless. The good thing is this, thankfully, you don't have to learn answers to all the 1,001 things you want to get your child to do. The answer in every case is exactly the same. Okay? It doesn't matter what the specific desired behavior is. The training, listen carefully, the training objective that every parent, father and mother, every parent must achieve within the first few years of your child's life, by the time he's 3 years old, 4 years old, okay, the training objective that you must accomplish or aim for is this, that your child will obey your instructions, whatever they might be, without whining, without protesting, without throwing tantrums, without you having to scream at them, yell at them, or to threaten them with all kinds of dire consequences. Now that is important because if you don't achieve that, I assure you, your entire parenting journey for the next 15 years is going to be one long, painful, uphill slog. You're going to be engaging constantly in endless battles of your will with your child. And by the time they become teenagers, there's no way for you to fight that fight anymore and win. Family life expert Dr. James Dobson explains why mothers often find it harder to establish authority over their children than fathers. And the reason is that mothers are a lot more patient. Mothers allow their children to test their patience a lot more than fathers. When a child disobeys, okay, and is already been informed of the consequences of such disobedience, the mother's tendency is they are far more likely not to mete out those consequences immediately. Instead, the typical mother would say, you do that one more time, right? Or they say, this is the final warning. Unfortunately, the child very soon learns that the final warning is not quite final. There's a second chance, third chance. The child doesn't know how many chances there are going to be. But you know what? Even a mother's patience would eventually run out. And when it runs out, the dam bursts. And because there's such a gigantic pent-up amount of frustration behind that dam, when it bursts explosively. It all comes out, and it comes out with lots of yelling, anger, tears, threats. And in fact, Dr. James Dobson says that this is the reason why, a lot of time, this is the reason why child abuse occurs. Not because mothers are bad. On the contrary, it's because they are nice, very nice, right? They're so nice until they cannot take it anymore, and then they lose it. See, it's important to understand this. When you are firm, when you're not firm, it confuses the child. Okay, when you don't draw the lines out clearly, it confuses the child because children need to establish what the boundaries really are. If you're not clear and you're not firm, the child feels compelled to keep pushing and pushing and pushing until he knows where the outer bound markers are. And when a child does that, he is not being naughty. He's not being willful. That is what children need to do to establish certainty for living their lives and for surviving in life. So if your child breaks your rule, you must meet the prescribed consequences, meet it out immediately. No second chance, no bargaining. So that the child does not just learn all the different things he can do or cannot do. More importantly, he learns the importance of submitting to parental authority without question, without which it is impossible to train any child. And the good news is this: it can be done. And if you get that right within the first few years, I assure you, your entire parenting journey is going to be a breeze. It's going to be smooth sailing, it's going to be enjoyable, and you're going to spend your time doing a lot of other fun things together rather than fighting with one another. Because, listen, if you get it right at 3 years old, you get it right at 4 years old, the Bible says that train a child in the way he should go, and when he grows up, he will not depart from it. And that's great wisdom. If you get it right at 3 years old, at 4 years old, it will stay with the child. When you will still be the child when they're 13 years old, when they're 14 years old, and that is when you need it most. So mothers, let me just encourage you to learn to exercise authority and to learn to exercise authority well. The second lesson we learn is about agreement. Agreement. Preachers love to preach the story of Isaac and Rebekah, the father and mother here. They love to preach the story of Isaac and Rebekah. And you know when they love to preach the story of Isaac and Rebekah? At around this time of the year, around Valentine's Day, because they love to preach about their love story. Okay, about how Isaac's father Abraham sent his servant to a faraway place to look for a suitable bride for his son Isaac, and how that wise servant went through a long process, and finally discovered this lovely bride, Rebecca, and managed to persuade her and persuade her father to have her go back with him, right, to a faraway place that she has never been, to marry a man that she has never met, to leave a family behind. And then they set out. They took that long journey on horseback, and then finally Rebecca arrives back in Isaac's hometown. She got off the horse, and the Bible paints such a beautiful picture in Genesis chapter 24, verse 67. Isaac brought her, Rebekah, into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. This sounds like a great start to a happily ever after story, doesn't it? I mean, it was love at first sight. It was beautiful compatibility. Isaac loved Rebekah, and Rebekah filled a deep void in his life. They were off to a great start. But like a lot of marriages that got off to a great start, the differences, the cracks soon start appearing. And in this story, you read it right in the next chapter, Genesis chapter 25. By this time, they had two twin boys. And it says in verse 27, the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home and among the tents, as different as can be. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So Isaac and Rebekah turned out to be two very different individuals. They each preferred a different kind of child. Now, by this, we are different people, different personalities and preferences. That's okay. These things are not major problems in themselves. The problem that each of them practice overt favoritism with regards to their own preferred child. And then, probably in reaction to the way that Jacob unfairly favored Esau, Rebekah decided to take things into her own hands. She decided to work against her husband. She decided to take advantage of his old age and failing eyesight and to deceive him so as to gain an advantage for her preferred son, Jacob. Isn't it sad? It's tragic. Isn't it sad to see how these two persons had gone from having such a loving relationship, such a great start, to being so opposed to each other and working at odds against each other. For many couples, your marriage went through the same transition, didn't it? Things were going well. You were a lovey-dovey couple. You were working together as a great team. Until, guess what happened? That's right, until the children started coming along. And then, like Isaac and Rebekah, you find yourself constantly at odds, fighting with each other about the right way to raise the children. And for some of you, it got even worse. You started favoring different children. That disagreement, that favoritism is a sure recipe for disaster and dysfunction. The Bible uses stories like this to teach us important lessons. And this story carries a sober warning for us that when parents don't agree, it has powerfully destructive and lingering effects. As a result of Isaac and Rebekah's disagreement, the two brothers became, they never got along well, but they became mortal enemies. Or at least on Esau's part, he made a vow that on the day that his father Isaac died, he was going to murder Jacob. He didn't bother to hide that. He made it so clear that Rebekah was terrified, and she called her son Jacob and told him that he had to go run away, and she sent him back to her relatives, to her hometown, where he lived for a very, very long time. His banishment was so long that ironically, Rebekah did not get to see her son, her precious son, ever again. All right? She paid a very, very high price for what she had done. And it's not just her, it's not just Jacob. many generations later, the Bible tells us that Esau's descendants, the Edomites, and Jacob's descendants, the Israelites, continued to harbor animosity towards each other. They never had a good relationship. Now, what this is telling us is that when you refuse to be in agreement with your spouse, you seldom appreciate the amount of damage that you do, and that such damage can last for a long time down through the generations. You know, part of God's purpose for having the family unit is so that children have a safe place in which to learn about authority, to respect authority, and to submit authority in a healthy way. But when authority is itself divided, what the child is going to learn is that authority cannot get its own act together. Why should I obey it? You lose credibility, and your child will learn to exploit your divisiveness. And the worst part of it is this: they are going to develop a distorted view of not just human authority, but ultimately of God's authority in their life as well. Okay, this is seriously bad modeling. Now, mothers, I know that many of you often feel that you know better, especially when it comes to the children. Okay, your husband may be good for many other things, but you, the mother, knows best when it comes to the children. I know that some of you, maybe all of you, are convinced that you are smarter than your husband. And some of you, I would say, are really smarter than your husband. When I married my wife, I had no doubt whatsoever that I was far smarter than her. But after 26 years of marriage, I'm suffering from self-doubt, and because there were a lot of times when, in spite of my own convictions, she was right, and I was wrong. Told you so, right? Mothers, I know that you often feel that way, but to all you mothers, I just want you to consider that whatever your disagreement with your husband, and even though both of you cannot resolve your differences, there are two important and precious things at stake when you disagree. One is the specific issue that you disagree on, whatever it may be, how to raise your child. And truth be told, maybe if you did it your husband's way, your child would be worse off. Maybe if you guys did it your way, your child would be better off. It's entirely possible. But listen, there's another important value at stake here. If you choose to defy your husband, if you choose to insist on your way, if you choose to go over his head, or worse, like Rebecca, actively undermine his authority, what is going to happen is that you're going to set in motion another whole set of dynamics that would ultimately, eventually be even more harmful for your child. The Bible says to wives, submit to your husbands in the Lord, or as to the Lord. Now, that doesn't mean that you treat your husband as God, no way. It means that so long as what your husband wants is not clearly unbiblical, is not obviously immoral, then you should respond joyfully and gladfully to his leadership. So, unless your husband is doing something that's clearly immoral or unbiblical, with regards to how the children ought to be raised, you ought to take their lead. Not because your husband is superior or cleverer in any way, but because simply that is good for your child and his future. Okay, so be in agreement. Work towards agreement with your husband, and even if you cannot achieve agreement, be wise about it. Okay, allow him to lead. The third lesson that we learn from this story is about attachment. I must confess, I really struggled for weeks whether really to include this point in my sermon, because I know that doing a mother's job is already hard enough without me having to put additional burdens on you, and because all mothers sincerely believe with all their hearts that they love their children with a pure and noble and selfless love. And it takes a very, very brave man to question that. However, after much prayer, concluded that if I don't include this point, I will not be doing my job, and in fact, I'll be doing you a disservice if I sugarcoat my message and leave this out. So here goes. Don't hate me for it. The point I want to make is this. The most important person in your life is not your child. It should not even be your husband. Okay, although your husband ought to be more important to you than your child. But your husband is not the most important person in your life. Rather, the most important person in your life ought to be God. Now, all of us, this is true for all of us, but all of us, whether we are fathers, mothers, or anything else, we all struggle with this. We all have the tendency to take the best things that God has given to us, the most precious things and most beautiful things in our life, and turn them into the ultimate thing. For men, it's very obvious. What's most precious to us is career success, wealth, accumulating money, fame, and power. And all of us, we are not immune from this temptation. We are greatly tempted to turn these things into our false gods. And we would do well to seek God's help and help one another to make sure that we are worshiping the one true God. Now for mothers, for most of you, the most precious thing in your life is or are your children, your wonderful children that God has entrusted to you. Now, to be fair to mothers, part of it is really biological. Because the mother's body produces a hormone called oxytocin. Okay, and oxytocin has powerful chemical effects and psychological effects. And it makes mothers feel especially bonded to their children and fiercely protective of their children. And that's what enables mothers to make such incredible sacrifices for their children. Those of you who are fathers, I'm sure that you have experienced this. You have suffered from this, right? Because you know that overnight your wife, who is so sweet and attentive and caring, when the children come along, they suddenly just switch all their attention, all their affection over to that little crying, whining, shitting, eating bundle. And you really suffer from withdrawal symptoms. Okay, I just want to encourage all of you husbands in a position, don't take it too personally. Okay, it's not that your wife loves you any less or don't care about you anymore, but there are powerful forces at work inside her body. Now, God made mothers that way because human babies are totally dependent on their parents for an extended period of time, unlike all other creatures. Okay, we are the most dependent. Human infants are the most dependent for the longest period of time. If mothers did not have such a powerful attachment to their babies, none of us would have made it past infancy. That's a fact. The problem is that this is a good thing, but as I said, sin has corrupted every good thing that God has created, and it's just as possible to turn your attachment to your children into a false god. And whether it's men or women, mothers or fathers, when we do something like that, the Bible calls this the sin of idolatry. What is an idol? An idol is anything that we look to for ultimate meaning, value, or worth. It is whatever we establish our identity on. It is that thing that will give up everything in order to secure. Or conversely, it's that thing that will make us feel that life is not worth living if we do not get it or if it's taken away from us. That is an idol. That is what drove Rebekah to do what she did. She loved her son Jacob dearly, no doubt, but she had an idolatrous attachment to her son. And this is something that all mothers have to grapple with, mothers who want to honor God. Jesus, the Gospels, the Bible, the Gospels record a really insightful conversation that Jesus had with a woman, 2 sentences only. But I think it really captures the heart of this issue. If you go to Luke chapter 11, verse 27, it says, as Jesus was saying these things, a woman in the crowd called out, "Blessed is the mother who gave you birth and nursed you." Verse 28, Jesus replied, "Blessed, rather, are those who hear the word of God and obey it." Now, you see, in Jewish culture back then, men were the movers and shakers of society. Women had very little value and very little status. Women were considered good only for taking care of the home and raising children. Right? They were severely discriminated against, unfairly and severely discriminated against. A Jewish woman's best hope for honor and glory is to be able to raise a child who grew up to become a great man, a famous man, a great man. And that is behind the idea that this woman was articulating. Jesus was, at this point in time, attracting humongous crowds, right, who were hanging on to his every word, his teaching, and were awed by his miracles. And people were even asking, is this the Savior promised in our scripture, the Old Testament, the Savior who was supposed to come and deliver Israel and save us all? His popularity was at its height. To have the privilege of raising someone as successful as Jesus was the greatest pride a mother could possibly have. And that's why she said what she said. Now, think about this conversation. If you were Jesus' mother, if you're Mary, and this conversation was reported back to you, how would you have felt? I think you probably have felt hurt. You probably might even have felt offended. Okay, today we would have expected someone in Jesus' position to affirm the woman's sentiment. Yep, you are right. My mother is my greatest hero. Without her, I wouldn't be who I am today. Right? That's the expected response. But you know, Jesus, he seldom gives the expected response. Not just because he wants to be contrarian, but because he wanted to seize the opportunity to teach a very important lesson. So he critiques his own culture. And he says this, a great mother is not a mother who raises the most accomplished children. A great mother is any mother who loves God above everything else. Now, we need to do this, and it's not difficult to do this. We need to draw a contemporary application for ourselves. Right? Because, hey, this was 2,000 years ago, but honestly, Singaporean society is not so different today. You know, after my sister's 2 children both went to Ivy League universities, one to Berkeley, followed by Harvard, and the other went on a scholarship to Johns Hopkins and a simultaneous degree in music at the Peabody Institute. After both her children went to those Ivy League schools, she said so many people in church came to her to ask her for parenting advice. How do you raise children who can do that? How can you raise children who can how can the best chance of raising children who can achieve what you have achieved? Blessed is the mother who gave birth and raised such accomplished children. What do you think Jesus would have said to all that? No, they even asked her to run seminars to teach people how to do this. What do you think Jesus would have said to that? He would have said, blessed rather are those who hear the word of God and obey it. On another occasion, the Bible records this in Luke chapter 14, verse 25. It says, large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciples. Whoever does not carry their own cross and follow me cannot be my disciples. Jesus, of course, is not asking us literally to feel hatred for our close family members. He is using the technique of hyperbole to teach emphasis, exaggeration to drive home a point. He is saying that our devotion to God must be so overriding, so supreme, so consuming, so supreme that in contrast, all our other loves would pale in comparison, that you may even say that they seem like hatred. Now, I'll be first to admit that this is a very, very difficult lesson to learn. You know, Jesus is not interested in crowd pullers. Yeah? He says, at the height of his popularity, that with the time for him to cash in on it, to capitalize in on it, to get even more people to come, he says something that is so difficult, and you can be sure lots and lots of people walk away from him after that. It's a difficult lesson for us as well, and all of us have to grapple with it in our own situations in life. Personally, for me, I confess that I need God's daily grace not to become so attached and consumed by ministry that it becomes the God in my life. And I've had also the privilege to observe up close my wife's journey in this regard as she grappled with not making the children the ultimate value in her life. And remember, many years ago, she had wanted to do volunteer work to improve our first child's chances of getting into a good, well, in Singapore, you can't say that, right? Every school is a good school, but to get into a preferred primary school. Now, please don't get me wrong, okay? Please don't go away and say, Pastor Tiak say that you cannot go and do volunteer work, unspiritual, ungodly, idolatrous. You cannot go and change your address or whatever. I say nothing of that sort. Okay? What I am sharing with you is that we evaluated it, and at that time, it was obvious to us that if she was going to do this, it would compromise on the things that God has entrusted us to do, and especially our ministry in church. So we agreed not to do it. And it was with great reluctance, okay, that my wife chose to do nothing. And when the time came for registration, we simply went to the nearest school, which was quite far away, that had still a lot of places. No need to ballot, no need to queue, still lots of places, and we enrolled him there. Okay, that was part of our learning experience. But we learned not only to surrender to God and make Him first in our life, along the way, the wonderful truth is that we learned also that God is far more gracious than we can imagine. Yes, He demands all, nothing less. But He also blesses greatly. In fact, no one can ever outgive God. God is never in anybody's debt. And we had to learn this lesson again and again, because at the end of primary 3, my son was selected for the gifted education program, and so he got to choose any of the most preferred schools in Singapore. As a result, number 3, number 4, they were enrolled in the same school automatically under the sibling scheme. That left my daughter, who was already starting primary 3 that year. So I went to the school and asked them, can we transfer her to this school as well? And they gave us the expected response. They said, no, it's very full, but we will put your name down and we will put you on the waiting list. If somehow a place becomes available, it's your turn, we will call you. Okay, I went off thinking, okay, they're just being polite, they're just patronizing me. But you know something? Exactly 1 year later, the school actually called us up and said to us, a student had just migrated, so there is a place for your daughter. If you still want it, you can transfer her over here. Okay, we already bought all the textbooks for the other school, but we transfer her so that all 4 of the siblings could be in the same school. Okay, and it is not because we did anything about it. It was purely a divine orchestration. Over the years, we've experienced many such divine orchestrations in our lives, even as we grappled with putting God first in our lives. Sometimes we did it right, sometimes we did it wrong, but along that journey, that was a powerful thing that we learned that God is so gracious. Through it all, I would say that my wife has increasingly learned to let go and let God as a mother. In fact, 2 years ago, I think she reached a new level because I was surprised. I was very surprised because we had one child taking A-level, one child taking O-level, and one child taking PSLE. I think that's the ultimate already. But unlike in the past where she would be so uptight, she would be so worried, she would spend so much time trying to help the children, this time round, wow, she was totally at peace. In fact, she devoted more time to serving in church than she ever had in her life. She was in a youth ministry, which took up almost the whole of all the Saturdays. She was a leader in the adult zone, and it took up a lot of time. And she spent many nights doing premarital counseling, and some of you counseled by her as well. Now, to be honest, I was secretly wondering in my heart, she also had a full-time job as well, right? I was secretly wondering in my heart if she was doing too much for the church. But I'm the pastor, so I didn't say anything. But really, I didn't say anything because I could see that this was God's work in her life. That as she learned to trust Him more and more, God's gracious blessings somehow just kept flowing into her life and into our family. So I want to end by saying this to all of you mothers. Okay, as we invite the worship team to come up here. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing society's hardest job and most important job. And thank you for doing it even though you receive so little appreciation and no pay for the great work that you do. Honestly, truly, none of us would be here. None of us would be what we are, who we are today, if not for our mothers. So to all the mothers, I just want to say we love you, honor you, and appreciate you. And as a church, we want to do whatever we can to encourage you, to support you in your role as mothers. At the same time, I'm going to urge all of you to keep learning to trust God in your role as a mother. Remember this, the children God has entrusted to your care are really not your own. And actually, that's a very good thing. They belong to God, and because they belong to God, God has a wonderful plan for their lives, and God is totally, wisely committed to their well-being and their future. And if you understand that, then you know that you don't need to be anxious about raising your children. You don't need to try and seize control. Okay, you don't need to try and control your husband, your children, in the fear that things will turn out badly for them. God will work out His plans through all the good things and bad things that happen to your child, even if they don't get into your preferred school. I assure you, God's plan is not thwarted. You may not always understand God's ways, but you can always be sure that God remains totally and completely in control. And He desires good for your children. He loves your children even and far more than you do. I hope that will set you free to enjoy being a mother. And not only that, to enjoy all the other things that God has called you to do, whether it is in your work, in your marriage with your husband, or in your ministry in church. And we all know, here in Brighton Community Church, we believe that Christians ought to live radically, because that's the kind of life the Bible has called us to as followers of Jesus Christ. We don't believe in doing one thing or a few things to the exclusion of the other important things that God has called us to do. Because if we do that, that's a sure sign of idolatry, of an unhealthy attachment. We believe instead that with God's grace, we can be effective fathers and mothers, husbands and wives, contributing actively in the home, in the marketplace, and in the church of Jesus Christ. Now, I know it takes faith to live that kind of radical life, but when you do that, you will personally discover that God rewards such faith. And then you'll no longer consider it a chore, but an adventure and a joy that you wouldn't exchange anything else for.